Direct from Taos, New Mexico, it's the To Walk with Giants podcast with indie comic book creator Cody Fernandez and indie musical artist Christopher Messick.
Hello, hello. Let's see. There's the mic audio. It's working. We're here.
Excellent.
We
Cool.
exist. Co-host is working as well. We're good. It's flying, moving. Welcome, folks, to Walk with Giants. I'm one of the hosts, Cody Fernandez, and joined by.
I'm Laguna Munta, Christopher Messick. Either way, that is me.
All right. Well, we're here today to chat about leadership. That's our giant we're going to try and figure out and not get stomped on by. I usually throw it to you to start off. Do you mind doing that once again?
Oh, sure. I was going to throw it to you. So
Oh,
here we go.
haha, I got to it faster, quicker on the draw.
Well, I should be used to it at this point. So leadership. This is an interesting topic. Of course, I immediately went to the context of music and creation and what it means to be like a band leader and to lead in that way, because that's probably the most. Aside from working with people or working for people, that's the first thing that I think of when I think of leadership. And so, leadership can shape the outcome of things. It can shape the. It's a big part of the morale of the people you're working with. So if you're in a band and the leadership is not, if it's bad, or let's say immature or doesn't have focus, everybody's going to suffer from it. So, one key aspect I think of leadership is direction and kind of a common goal. That's important because if you're going to follow somebody, you better hope you know where they're leading you. You better hope that they have your best interests at heart. And that's what a good leader is, in my opinion. Somebody who has your best interest and common goal of the group and pursuing that to the best of their ability without these sort of secret agendas and kind of selfish aspects of it. And so, in a band context, that's the idea that the band flourishes, that everybody kind of gets to express themselves well, and everybody gets to share in the victories as well as the work, and really feel like a solid unit. And it's up to the leader to cultivate that um, space to do that.
I agree. I think that's the big difference between good leadership and poor leadership. Leadership in general, let's say, so it would include good and bad leadership. Just so we kind of define it, is a controlling mechanism within a group, right? And it's usually an individual represents that controlling mechanism. It's not always. Leadership can be a group of people as well, but when we were talking about bands there, yeah, and it tends to manifest in the form of what we call a front man. Um, Not always. Sometimes the front man isn't the band leader. Iron
Right.
Maiden is a great example where actually Steve Harris is the band leader and Bruce Dickinson is the front man. But that's very rare. I would say more often than not, it's often the vocalist that's the front man and tends to be the band leader either because of their personal qualities or just because that's kind of how the cookie crumbles in terms of like
Right.
audience interaction and things that are
They are
seen.
the voice of the
Yes,
band
quite
in many
literally,
ways.
quite literally. So. Poor leadership is kind of defined. It can be defined in a lot of different ways. One of the biggest and worst parts, and I think you touched on that, is aimlessness, right?
Yeah.
Having a leader that does not have a direction, a vision, a driving will. It doesn't even have to be very clear, but it has to be forward momentum. Their own ability to carry a forward momentum means nothing's going anywhere. Whether or not that's part of the group's dynamics or if it's simply that individual and how they function and are placed in that position. Um, Leadership in general requires, at least good leadership, in my experience, requires being an example. Again, having that vision, but not only having it, but being able to show how it can be manifested so that others, if they resonate with that vision, with that concept, they can have a path forward in which to step, and maybe they'll be inspired to take their own steps in their own directions from that leadership and grow the greater ensemble's goals. But nonetheless, it gives it again forward momentum. That's the big thing. Poor leadership causes, at worst, backwards momentum, and about medium, stagnation. And
Yeah.
neither of those things are qualities of good leadership.
My friend years ago, he was talking about when he was in a band in his teens, and he said we were going nowhere slow.
There you go. Exactly. That's how it goes, right? Especially if we're going to youth, right? Young leaders are.
Right.
That's a kind of a almost an oxymoron because of how difficult it is for that. It needs to be a core part of their being because they don't tend to have the experience to back it up, right? It
Yeah,
has to be
and
something almost innate.
right, and I could speak to that because I was a band leader and I did not have that experience, and I was not even fully aware of. I hadn't fully figured out who I am.
Yeah.
Not that I have now, but certainly more so than I had when I was 15 or 16. I've definitely matured since then. I'm pushing 32, so I've had some time. I've also had some experiences, and I've had greater examples of leadership, and I've had bad examples of leadership, and those are all very teachable moments and learnable moments. Um, I've worked for people that were very kind, and they were very generous, and they were magnanimous, and they were great people to be around, and those are the kind of people you want to be around because they make you want to be better.
Yes.
I have a bad habit, and I've done it before, where if I'm working around people who are sort of lackadaisical and they don't work that hard, if they don't try that hard, I kind of I fall into that. I go, well, I'm not gonna like bust my ass to make up for this. I'm just gonna work as hard as you work. You're setting the pace because you're the leader. You're in charge here. This is your operation. So if you're gonna work this hard, well, you're not gonna get more uh, from me. And this is important to note that I haven't worked in fields that were like of great import. I haven't been a caretaker or in the medical field or
That's
anything
what I
like
was
that. These
gonna,
are
yeah, to speak to
right.
my
Well,
end of
these
it.
are very simple jobs. These are jobs that, it's just like, oh well, this guy had a bad habit of not doing this part of his job. And I was like, okay, well, why would I want to make up for that? And again, this is a bad habit, something you have to get out of and you have to grow out of yourself. But that's an example of what can happen under bad leadership, especially when you expect them to set the tone when you've had good leaders who have set a good tone and you followed them because it's the instinct to follow the leader.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned caretaking. That's been my professional career, other than the art bits that I've done here and there. And within that, um, poor leadership can really thrive in that environment because of the expectations of the job itself being what they are. You're not failing the leader or the company, quote unquote, when you fall behind. You're failing an actual individual who needs help, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a bigger difference, and that is
Yes.
why burnout is so common, particularly in nursing and actual like people caretaking.
Yeah,
Um,
give it up for the nurses.
yeah, no shit. I mean, doctors 5-10 minutes, and these nurses are dealing with you 12, 13 hours a day.
Right.
It's a very different gig. But that's the bit too. Is it makes your job harder. You could be doing a great job, and you're doing a great job because you love what you're doing. But your leadership is something you have to navigate around. That sucks. I've experienced that many
Well,
different
yeah.
forms, where leadership is something in the way instead of something paving a way, which is what it should be.
Right. A bulldozer, a spearhead,
Mm-hmm.
somebody guiding you, not a speed bump or a pothole.
Exactly. Yeah, nothing to again dance around or please, just so that you can keep doing your own thing without them bothering you.
Right. And there's also the problem of a disconnected leader.
Yes.
These kind of lofty leaders who just kind of float above and they cruise through and they don't really understand the meat and potatoes, the nuts and bolts of the operation, to where they couldn't run things. I've experienced that where it's like the people I've worked for, good people, nice people, but like you put them in the situation that you're used to in your job that you do day to day, and they don't know how to do it.
Yep.
And that does not do well for morale. Uh,
No, no, it does
yeah, that
not.
does
It's
not do well at all. And so that's a big part of leadership is respect.
yeah.
You have to respect these leaders. You don't have, I mean, if you, in order for it to work, you have to respect them. So they have to be worthy of respect and they have to cultivate that respect.
I was gonna say that that tends to be it's more of a mutual thing. I respect leaders that tend to respect me, and they usually show that by at least making attempts to understand your role within that. Right? They don't have to
Yeah.
be great at it or whatever, but they understand or at least make the attempt to understand what your piece of the machine does. Um,
Yeah, and that's why some of the best leaders are people who have worked their way up, and
yep.
so they know every aspect, so they know where they know where you are because they were there, and not these people who are just again these lofty leaders. The silver spoon type, I guess you could say, who just inherit a business or something like that, and don't know how it functions.
Yeah, and then they may have a vision, but it's completely counter to what the mechanism was built for.
Yeah,
Um,
and having a vision is great, but you have to be able to enact it.
and that's the big
I
thing.
could dream all day, you know.
Yes, and so and that's the bit for me. And I think we did hit this. They inspire by action. They
Yes.
inspire by mutual respect, which I would say most of the respect I gain starts with respect given to me. I mean, there's a baseline of it that's like, well, you're just another living being, so you get this much from me just in general because that's what you are. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I also kind of need to feel that filtering back before there's any kind of
Relationship.
relationship, and then particularly so that I can trust and rely on these individuals. And that's a big thing about leadership too, is a lot of the time it really requires the team to be able to have that faith in that leaders for mechanisms to work, right? A lot of
Yeah.
the time there's a lot of stuff that the team cannot know because it's not part of their job and it's not part of what's running in the background and all of that, but you have to
Right.
have a certain level of respect and faith for that leader to take care of those things and to actually keep that bit of it functioning and off of their shoulders so that everybody can do their part.
There's a good example of something like that. Gary Oldman, in an interview, he was speaking about when he worked with Christopher Nolan on the Dark Knight trilogy.
Okay.
He was saying that he hardly ever gave Chris Nolan hardly ever gives notes,
Mm.
and he said he with like the 7 years he worked with him, he probably gave him 2 notes.
Okay.
And there was one scene, and he didn't disclose which scene, but he said, "Oh, we had finished the scene," and Chris comes over to me and he says, "There's more at stake." And Gary Oldman's like, "Oh, and I got it instantly, right away. I knew what I needed to do." He didn't have to explain to me everything that was going on and how it was going to work and all these things going on in the background and break it down and all this because Gary Oldman didn't need to know that. He just needed to know that one simple thing.
No,
The
he was
rest of
Gary
it was for
Oldman.
Chris Nolan.
And
It was
that's the bit.
for him
Yeah.
to keep in his head, you know. And I've caught myself doing that sometimes where I have people working with me and I might over explain things and it gets overwhelming because I'm overwhelmed by how much like I can have to try to keep in my head if
Yes.
I'm trying to coordinate something, and I don't realize that I might be putting too much on somebody. So that's actually a skill I've gotten a little bit better at. I've learned that skill is just not just giving people enough information to do their best work.
And that's from that what I understand from that is Christopher Nolan knows Gary Oldman, a very accomplished, well seasoned actor,
Right.
doesn't need to be told how to do his job. He just needs to be told what he wants from that job. If you know what I mean.
Exactly.
And that's all I
Hmm.
said. It's like,
Two
well,
professionals.
yes. And that was the mutual respect, right? It's not you're
Right.
not talking down to somebody and telling them their job that honestly Christopher Nolan couldn't do, right? He just knows how to
Right.
work around it. And it's the same
Yeah.
Gary Oldman. Maybe he could direct, but I don't think he could be Christopher Nolan, right?
I don't
That's
think
the
so.
bit. I think only Nolan could be Nolan. So
Right.
it's that it's again it's that mutual respect, and with respect comes the ability to trust, and with trust comes the ability to manifest. Honestly, it's what allows things to happen. Because if you don't trust, then you're constantly micromanaging, and then
Oh
why is
God.
that person there? Right? You just work then. I,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like you just do
Uh,
it then if you're going to be that controlling of it.
I hate being micromanaged. God, it's the worst thing.
Yeah, I've lucked out. I've never really had managers like that, and when I do, I've navigated it quite well to the point that's like, oh, I guess I could just trust this guy. I don't need to deal with it. Or they got sick of dealing with how I interacted with that because there are ways to interact with authority in which they lose their authority and they have to come down to your where you're at, and a
Right,
lot of them aren't very comfortable with that, and
right,
so they don't want to deal with it again, even though it's very polite and respectful and all of that.
right. Well,
It's fun.
I can only remember a couple instances where I've been like, there's been attempts to micromanage
Mm,
me, and I was just like, well, I don't really see the point in doing that because this, and this, and I had like reasonable explanations for it, and they kind of dropped it, but I'm glad that it's one of those things you kind of have to catch early
yes, that's the thing.
because if
It's got to be quick.
otherwise, oh my God,
Once it becomes a rhythm, then you're stuck, and it's again
you're screwed.
for me control. It's disrespectful. Again, you're not trusting me, and you're not believing I can do this work how you
And
want it to.
that's the thing about leadership. It's like if you chose me for this job,
Yes.
you obviously thought that I was capable of it, and here you are, kind of showing me that you don't think that.
Yeah.
So it's like, what kind of person are you? Now you got me questioning like you, and now
Yes.
it's all falling apart now because you
Yes.
just couldn't trust
And
me.
that's the difference between being like, and that's one of the most important things in a leadership role is the ability to delegate. And when you're delegating,
Yeah.
it means you're trusting this person to perform this task because you can only be so many places at once, right?
Or you're not capable of it. You might have somebody who's
Absolutely.
just like that's what they're good at, and you're like, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, like I can't do this. It's up to you. You have to do
Yep.
this.
And then that's the bit. And leadership is usually I think the best leadership not only leads for example, they have their role to perform and they do it, but they're also the organizational structure, right? They make sure that
Yeah.
even if those roles are very diverse and they don't have much overlap, but they do perform and overlap in the same machine, that all of that's working and managing together, and that's the big bit. It can be a mediator position, often it is because people are people. It's a
Right.
guiding bit, and it's guiding, not controlling. Massive difference.
Yes.
It's a and again, if you're performing those, then you're doing that well. But usually, you also have your own roles in which to take that are beyond those, and that's why it's a good leader is very difficult to find. It's not an easy role, not
No,
whatsoever.
it's not, and it's not one I would really choose lightly.
Yes, that's another one.
Especially given my experience, it's just not something I would take on lightly. I think now that I'm older and a little bit more with it, I understand the responsibility that it entails and the delicate nature of the role, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one to balance, and it's it's easy to fall into self-doubt, I guess, especially in a creative endeavor because what creative doesn't doubt themselves? Or how many ideas have you come up with that you thought, oh well, this is garbage 2 weeks later, and you pitch it. If you have a team of people or a handful of people that are working with you or for you towards a common goal, that's that you've got to tame that insecurity quickly, and you have because you can't, it's kind of one of those things where you can't show weakness to a certain degree. Weakness in this case being that indecision or that kind of directionlessness, which we were talking about earlier. These are the moments where you have to. Oh, there's a great example.
There you go.
In Star Trek Next Generation, there's an episode where Beverly Crusher and Captain Picard, they can like share thoughts. They get this telepathic link, and they're stranded on this planet. I don't remember the exact premise of the film except for the telepathic
Yeah.
link. And they have this map, and they don't know which way to go. And Picard picks up the map and he looks at it and he goes, "We'll go this way." And they start walking, and then Crusher kind of has this moment where she's like, "Wait a second," and she goes, "You're not sure about which way to go, are you?" Because like she could
Yep.
sense his thoughts, and
Yeah.
he wasn't sure which
Nope.
way to go, but because he's the leader, he looked and he made a decision, and he you know
Yep.
gave an order with confidence because that's what you're supposed to do when you're the leader, and I think he explains it as such.
I wish I remembered that one. Nonetheless, that's exactly what it is. You may not even have, particularly in that exploratory, semi-military sort of role where lives are at stake. We're not even chatting about, we're not talking about some creative endeavor or what have you. Where yeah, lives, finances, those kind of things. Of course, those are on the table. But it's not instant death. Say you're gonna charge over the trenches and you got to be the one to make that choice and which young man's gonna do it and those kind of things. Um,
Yeah.
that's a whole different story where that confidence in that bit that need, and I think we spoke about this on the last podcast, but that need to be a symbol manifests, and it absolutely needs to exist because that the leadership as a symbol is what action rallies around towards a common purpose.
Yes.
And without that, I mean, again, that's the whole point of it. That's it is to manifest a common purpose out of diverse concepts and
Right.
actions, people, all these things. It's gathering many streams into one big old river. Um,
I have a good quote here. This is from Dune, the
oh,
novel, and I will attribute the quote to the character after I've read it.
okay.
It says, "A leader, you see, is one of the things that distinguishes a mob from a people. He maintains the level of individuals. Too few individuals, and a people reverts to a mob." And that is the Fremen leader Stilgar. And that really struck me because one thing that I really have a gripe with in this day and age is just the lack of individuality. And I thought it was interesting that this particular leader thought it was his duty to maintain the level of individuals because I don't think a lot of leaders, air quotes, think that way. I think that that is probably counter to what a lot of leaders think. Because I think most modern day leaders want everybody to kind of join in, follow along, go with them, back them, toe the line sort of thing. So I thought that was an interesting statement from a leader of a people,
No,
fictional or other.
but what is it? Don't remember who this was. And it's a paraphrase part of a quote, but the mob is the mother of tyrants. So it's kind of it's a cycle, right? You don't maintain the amount of individuals, you end up with a mob. The mob becomes a very blunt instrument for a singular purpose. We've seen it manifest many times, and a lot of the times it certainly changes things. It's a very blunt instrument. It hits
It
very
works.
hard. Exactly. But the after effects do lead a lot. They usually crash open a vulnerability in whatever system that led to that mob, and that vulnerability is then exploited by any of those individuals that were actually able to maintain their individuality, right?
Right.
And so we get some of the nastier folks in history, and they were certainly leaders. They were able to guide, manifest, control, conquer,
Yeah.
genocide, many dark things, and they were absolutely leaders. They either inspired via inspiration by ideas or the symbol they were able to present, or they inspired the other type of leadership by fear,
Yeah, or just being
implication.
charismatic
Yes,
because of the implication.
exactly. It's just because of the implication. It's not even actual fear or power. It's the possibility. It's their ability to manage and guide a perspective on possibility
Right, but
and
because
place it
the
on somebody.
imagination is
Yep.
is terrifying.
Yes, they don't exactly. So, there's were they great leaders, quote unquote? Well, it depends how we want to define great and
They
leaders.
did terrible things.
Uh,
Great.
exactly, and so it's those where the words are often attributed to positive characteristics, but sometimes it means massive or large or epic. It
Yeah,
means
and so
the scale is large.
that shows you how important a choice of leader is. And just because someone is running for a position does not mean they are capable of being a leader. So just by casting a vote for a leader does not mean that you are actually going to get a leader. Something
Oh my God! Yeah, that's a whole other concept when we go into the
right.
concept of
Well,
democracy. But to talk
right.
about
Well,
mob rule.
one thing I said a few years ago and I still believe this, is, and I'm wearing my Excalibur shirt, so that works. King Arthur. The King Arthur's just kind of this legendary leader, sort of beloved, flawed human, but beloved, and did the best he could as a leader, and is kind of recognized as such in the legend. Um, but I was saying that I don't really feel that there are leaders these days who would have the honor and the kind of integrity to sort of fall on the sword for their people. Not that Arthur did, but it's a very mythic image, this idea of these people who would self-sacrifice for the greater good of the people. I just don't see that. I don't think that that really exists in the system that we have currently,
Uh,
as far as just government in general. I don't think it's suited for that.
no, our systems have bred a lot of fat, rich men who want to stay fat and rich, quote unquote fat. A lot of them are skinny, but they're old and rich, and you don't get
Fat with
old.
cash.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to put it, or with greed, or with other
Eating buttered
tendencies.
lobster.
But no, and I agree. But that's those kind of mythical archetypes sort of heroes have existed. I mean, the most modern and last one I can think of in ours kind of became that in our society was JFK. They made sure everybody saw that quote unquote sacrifice, quote unquote, again and again and again. And that was again, it's the most popular snuff film ever shown, and they don't really treat it like one, but that's what it is.
Mhm.
And that one was a big one, and it was not so much a in the front lines with your men and charging ahead of the pack kind of deal. It was more being one of the last powers to stand against another great power and fail, quote unquote. Um,
Right. Well, that's an interesting topic, JFK, because
mhm.
while he was likable, he did under his
Oh, so many awful things.
in his office, or under his, what do you call it? Under his rule, essentially, there were more CIA missions carried out overseas than under any other president at the time,
Yep. And
and
they
so
had
he was kind
convinced
of
him, and it was up to a point that he was going to cancel the Federal Reserve and try and scatter the CIA to the five winds or whatever he called it.
right. No
Um,
dice, but it's interesting because he used them a lot. It
Well,
suddenly gained the
allegedly they were. This is we can get very complicated, but how much he actually knew about at the time and how much was being done clandestinely is kind of a back and forth.
sure.
Because the commander in chief is again a symbolic role more than it is an actual role in most manifestations. We haven't had to deal with that. Even World War II, it was more symbolic. FDR wasn't really. He was signing things. He wasn't telling them to do this specifically, right? Um, and then that's the thing. The generals. That's the job of the generals. And within the OSS at that point, it wasn't even generals. It was colonels. It was folks within folks, much lower levels that were trusted by their leadership to be their own individuals and manifested a win for the USA. Woo! But nonetheless, leadership it's a tough one, and the mythological end of it, I don't know. I mean, we can go further back. You have like Sitting Bull. We can go to that kind of concept where it was folks charging into battle alongside their people to try and keep them free. Um,
Right.
we have many examples of that. The Scots did it quite a few times. Different. It's usually manifest during civil wars, right? And even then, you have really nasty people most of the time. Anything that involves violence eventually breeds nasty people in leadership roles. It's just how it goes. The one willing to commit the greatest violence usually becomes the leader. Um, it's might make right is kind of the law of nature, right? And so you get those quote unquote leaders, and we're top of the animal kingdom because of it. Um, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Very easy to make negative leaders, and I agree that the mythological archetype of a good man or a good woman, a good person being a leader, I couldn't point to any within a higher national role. And I'm not familiar with every president, prime minister, and such, but certainly the perception of the system at large. Uh, what was it? There's the quote, "Power corrupts," right? But
Hmm.
power attracts the corruptible is how I've heard it rephrased, and
That's what Frank Herbert says.
that was it. I think that's how I came across it. It stuck in the back of my mind, and it's like, yeah, that's actually more accurate because power itself is neutral. It needs to be used, and then once it's
Right. Well,
used,
and that's what he was getting at with Dune, and JFK was sort of his Paul Atreides, this young,
yeah,
charismatic leader who got us into Vietnam, and so that was kind of his warning against charismatic
yes,
leaders. And he said that Nixon was the greatest thing to ever happen, like one of the best politicians we've ever had, because he taught us to be wary of
oh,
of
there you go.
leaders.
Yeah, there we go. I was gonna say,
He taught us a
yeah, he
lesson.
sold us down the river pretty good.
He taught
Um,
us a lesson.
yeah, and there's been quite a few. There,
Oh
that's the one
yeah,
thing.
I mean, growing up, I always thought, if you think this person's good, you think this person's good, and maybe they are good, but when you're working on that scale,
Yeah,
the ramifications of your actions, there's going to be just huge
they're
impacts left
massive.
and
Yep,
right.
yep.
Yeah, and so that's a tough gig, but I think in the age of comfort, it's easier to become I think a corrupt leader. I think if there was
Oh, so we've got a new word for these corrupt leaders as well. We call them influencers. They're not leaders; they're influencers. And it's
hmm,
it's it's. I think George Carlin would have had some fun with that form of soft language, um,
right,
because
soft language.
but they're I mean that's the point, right? They're not leaders, but oh, here I am sitting with my Bugatti, and I've got this very specific, set of food that frozen food I order from that they don't order from, right? And they're trying to get you to buy that next to their car and that kind of shit. That's a type of leadership. It's not a beneficial kind or whatever. It's a marketing kind. It's that's why I think it was also the other reason soft language influence. We're just trying to nudge you towards this product or this area or that belief. We used to
Oh
call them
man,
politicians, and now we've
right,
got both.
and that works well on the masses.
Oh, very well.
And I think, I don't know, I may have brought this up. I hope I haven't. I'll just do it quickly if I have. There's a great episode of Dinosaurs. It's one of the bonus episodes. So they finished the series, they cut it short, but they had filmed other episodes. So when they released the DVDs, they were on there.
Cool.
And there's an episode where they're all playing a board game, hanging out, having a good time. And the dad, I can't remember his name at the moment, he realizes that he hasn't watched TV all day
Yeah.
because he's been spending time with his family and they've been enjoying each other and there's been this great day, and everybody's getting ready for bed because they're done playing with the board game, and he's like, oh well, maybe I'll just watch TV for a second. And he turns on the TV and there's this commercial for this collector's cup, and it's just crap that he doesn't need, and he's immediate, and he sees
Yeah.
these people in hot tubs and
Mhm.
they're living the good life and stuff, and and this mug is like his shot, I guess, at part of this good life, right? He
Yeah.
can be one of these elite who own this limited
Yeah.
edition mug. And he's like, oh, I'd give anything to have that. And then there's this devil pops up out of nowhere, this devil dinosaur, like this Faustian bargain happens, and but it just goes to show you, it's just that idea of how content and happy we can really be if we just pay attention to what's in front of us, and we're
Yes.
not led astray by these influencers or commercials or this kind of I collect things, I enjoy things, I buy things, I'm led astray by
Uh-huh.
consumerism.
Yep.
But I'm aware of it, and I try to be better at it. I try to be better about it, and I try to check myself. But the one thing that I think is a good takeaway is just, if we pay attention to what's in front of us and we cultivate our relationships with our friends and our family and try to build a better lives for ourselves, that's actually taking leadership of our own lives and our
Yes.
own happiness, and not leaving it to somebody else to give us our dreams.
Oh, I'm 100% with you. And we usually walk it around to this, which is great. But again, leadership is a tool and it's how you use it. Um, and in that case, the most important leadership is your own will, your own control, and your own ability to recognize when you are following where you should not be. Well, what's the. When I was a kid, I'd hear this all the time. Well, if your friend jumped off a cliff, would you too? That concept
Right.
where it's like, well, if I wanted to, sure, but that's my choice, right? You're not doing it because somebody else is doing it. You're taking your own guidance, right? And
Hmm.
that's it's important to remember and recognize that that's a thing. You sometimes it is far easier and definitely more comfortable to fall into someone else's rhythms than create your own, because creating your own takes effort, it takes energy, it takes consistency, which is the roughest part of it. And
Yeah.
all of those things take self leadership, take your application of will. And guiding that will towards something that you don't have now, but that you wish to see or manifest down the line.
Yeah, it's follow through, and it's and another thing that adds to the difficulty of this is the how this gratification, this instant gratification that we've gotten so used to, and especially younger generations, that makes it very difficult to stick to a plan, a long-term plan, especially multiple years plan, because we're so used to just hop. I mean, we can get anything we want with a click of a button, you know. And when we find something that we can't get with a click of a button, well, what do? Well, we move on to something that
Uh-huh.
we can get with the click of a
Mm-hmm.
button. So there's really uh that's a tough one. That's a tough one. That has to be cultivated by the parents.
Yeah.
Prevention of this access to cell phones and social media and all this crap, because we were so fortunate to grow up without that and kind of catch it as we were we came into adulthood. We weren't like these prepubescent fools, messing with this stuff. Like I like to say, all the idiotic and embarrassing things I've done, they're on home video. They're not
Yeah,
they're not on
right.
YouTube, and that's a
Right.
blessing. That's a
Yes.
blessing.
So much. So much. No, and that's the big one. We had space to exist in our own lives. Now we've had this massive
Yes. And without ramifications of existing.
that's the other bit
Now
too.
just existing, there's ramifications
Yes.
for it. Like there's consequences for just, showing up.
That's exactly for yeah, be yeah. No, and but that's because society, as it got larger and more technologically advanced, it got significantly smaller in some ways that are very, very, very important not to be so small.
Yeah.
Because we all start with the same blank slate that we've started with since you can say humans were humans, right? It's the same kind of level of consciousness, just different societal and environmental pressures placed upon them.
Yeah.
And we certainly did luck out that we were a in between kind of deal, because
Yeah.
generations before us have a harder time navigating this, as well as those after us are thrown into the deep waters from birth in some cases. There's a video I
Yeah.
saw of a little baby having nightmares and trying to scroll past things in their sleep.
Oh my god.
And that's when I was just, oh my god. So yeah, it was just a little kid. And I've seen where that stuff goes, and there's some really nasty psychological manipulation on kid-based algorithms and all that kind of fun stuff too that's happening. That there's some
Sure.
there's some dark
I've
stuff out
heard you
there.
talk about that.
But
Well, that makes me think of one thing. Parents and their
yes,
importance,
as the
because
leaders, yeah.
I said this years ago about my dad. He taught me how to be an individual, and it might sound counterintuitive, um, but he did, because he had his own opinions and he wouldn't always agree with me, and he wouldn't always insist that I agreed with him. And I could tell that he could tell that when I agreed with him, just because he was my dad, like when I was a kid or
Yeah.
something, he was grossed out by it and he didn't like it, and I could
Yeah.
just tell. And so that's another way of teaching someone how to be an individual. It's just don't go along with everything I say. Have your own opinions, have your own thoughts about this sort of thing. Think for yourself. Do your research kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, no shit. I think what we've kind of, I think I'm kind of thinking about as we've gone around it, but I think it's true. The most important leaders I can think of as examples, as like most important for society as well as the individual, are indeed the parents or the parental figures.
Oh yeah,
I don't think there's
100%.
anything close to it, and
Because
there's
that's
so
the front
many who
line.
forfeit. Exactly, there's so many who forfeit that role, and I think that's such a problem.
Yeah,
Because it's a hard role. Again, we're talking about leadership. It's one of the most difficult things to do correctly, and we're all people.
oh
We're
my
gonna
gosh.
fuck up all the
Oh yeah.
time,
Oh
but
yeah.
but you still need to wear that hat and make that choice, like Picard, and just say that way.
Well, that's
you
the
know?
thing, right? Exactly, and that's the thing. If you're worried about making a mistake, you're never going to start. And we've talked
Yep.
about that before too. And
Yep.
that's the end of the human race right there,
Yes.
baby. If
Exactly.
you're afraid to make a mistake and you don't start, that's it. That's
Yep.
lights out.
And I do truly believe that's the one, because as a societal function, they've raised the generation that builds the society on top of the one that they experienced, as well as on the individual, they're building the individuals who have to operate within that as well. And those are the two mechanisms which, allow any sort of human existence. And we've done all right comparatively for millions of years so far. We got somewhere.
We're hanging in
Is it
there.
great? Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to phrase it. We're hanging in there. We're gaining more knowledge and applying it. Sometimes fucking
But
up
with
pretty
greater
good.
knowledge comes greater sorrow.
Yep, and greater responsibility, quote unquote.
I have a
And
question for you though, Cody.
oh, okay.
Like just like, can you think of like an example in your life of not mess of like your parents in a leadership moment that you remember, whether good or bad, that comes to mind?
Huh.
Like what
Um.
not to be or what to be, like
Right. Well, so here's another important role of a leader, right? And I would say it's probably the second most important, because it's also a role parents take on, which is that of teachers, right?
yeah.
And that's a type of leader. It's a specific type of leader, but it's a type of leader. And my dad was a terrible teacher. But I was
There you
also a
go.
terrible learner, so it wasn't a great combo. I
Great
still learned
combo.
things, so we still both tried, and I still learned shit, and I'm so super,
Right.
super, super fucking grateful.
Well,
But we
this
were so
well, real
similar, we bumped heads so fucking hard on the same things, and it's just
right.
it would
Well,
get
this is real
stuck.
quick. There's the interesting point on that
Mhm.
exact interchange of
Uh-huh.
is Robert Bly talks about it in Iron John. He talks about how the father and son just they cannot communicate with one another because they're both in different mythological realms.
Mhm.
Like they're both in completely different places.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I've experienced that, but continue.
Yeah, I would think most who had a present father have experienced this. I think it's just how it goes. I was very lucky that that separate mythological realm, let's say, had a beautiful rainbow bridge. There were places where we could communicate and find the common
Right.
ground and the love and all those important things that you do need to experience from a masculine role model, alongside um, the masculine role model other bits, the making the money, making sure folks are taken care of, making sure things are working, making sure everybody's okay with your own strength and force of will and body in many cases. And that was a wonderful example. So his leading by action was far greater than his attempts at teaching, for me.
Right. Explanations weren't as clear as his
Yes,
actions.
exactly. And those
Yeah,
actions were
that makes
evident,
sense.
consistent, and true. And that's what
And
resonated and
it's
allowed me to learn them and hopefully continue to carry that forward.
well, and they say that's how kids learn properly anyway. They learn through absorption.
Yep.
They what they see. So that's good. And
So,
it's just funny that because older generations are kind of known for not being able to express things well.
yes, particularly
So
the
it's
men.
kind of
My dad had that real
right,
hard, because he
right.
was born 1940. His dad, God, that would be 1900. So very different kinds of masculine role models and environments to grow up in,
Totally. And
as well
life,
as
yeah,
in
exactly.
countries as well. His dad, I believe, was born here, but
Mhm.
his parents were not. His parents were
Gotcha.
born in Spain. So there was that direct bridge from the my it would be great grandparents on his side only spoke Spanish, right?
Mhm.
So it was just those cultural divides as well, and European child rearing as Spanish in particular, pretty medieval, and it stayed pretty medieval, and honestly can still be quite medieval in its
Yeah.
expressions of masculine relationships. And I lucked out that my father, he was crushed by them. He survived that crushing and decided to completely rebuild himself from that granite, from that dust and specks, and rebuild something new. And that was taking charge and leadership over his own life instead of trying to fall into the roles that society
Yeah.
was placing upon him. And that was another great example that I've tried to follow and have been blessed to not have similar struggles with.
Right. Yeah, and I have examples of the bad communication
Mhm,
with my dad as
mhm,
well. It's
mhm.
just I swear to God, there were some times where we were talking, and I love my dad dearly,
Yes.
and we had a great relationship. Very fortunate to have the father I did. But there were times when we were talking, and I swear to God, we were having two different conversations.
Yep.
I would say one thing, and he'd say something that sounded completely unrelated,
Yep.
and then I would say something, and he probably felt the same
Yes.
way. He's probably, "What
Exactly.
the hell is this guy talking about? I don't understand what he's saying."
And you're
But
just bashing intentions against each other. Yeah,
we
I know
tried, we were
that one.
trying,
Yeah.
and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But
Yeah.
I remember some good leadership moments on his part where he had this knack for throwing me into situations that I'd never been in before and kind of
Mm.
forcing me to figure it out. Not the John Wayne throwing the kid in the river, you know,
Yeah.
but metaphorically the same. Where he
Yeah.
would just like I remember him putting me in the car when I was probably 10 and wanting me to do something, wanting me to drive it somewhere in the parking lot or in around the house, and he was just like, "All right, do it, figure it out." And I'm like, what? And he taught me some stuff, but what I realized later on down the line is he knew that he was never going to be able to teach me everything,
Yes.
and he wasn't going to be around all the time to help me through a situation. So what he gave me in those moments, which there were many moments like that, is he gave me the ability to get thrown into a new situation, not panic, and
That's the
actually
one.
figure out how to overcome and how to get through it. And that was so wise of him.
Oh no,
And I didn't
that's a
realize it at
very
the time. I
important
was like, this
lesson.
guy's just torturing me, or I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
overwhelmed or whatever,
Yeah. Mhm.
And but it's come in so handy. So I think that's a great leadership aspect that my father possessed was this
I think, and
figure it out.
I can't pull up the quotes. I tried to. I didn't separate the tabs properly. I don't want to do that while we're recording. But one of the quotes I came across is one of the greatest roles of leadership is to take people from where they were to somewhere they haven't been.
Mm,
And that's kind of what you're talking about.
yeah.
You're putting someone in a position there so that they can adapt and grow to it. And if you're building a team, and you want a team that, if we're talking about art and creativity, you want a team that's adaptable and can survive a very brutal industry. You want them to be adaptable and to be able to survive. And how you do that? Well, you test them and you allow them to grow. You see where you can work around their strengths and possibly shore up their weaknesses, or teach them how to work around their weaknesses. You want
Bend but
to.
don't break.
I think a big part of leadership then is observational knowledge of who you're leading as well. Being able to figure out how to communicate to them your vision, that hopefully is a positive, growing vision. It's something that's worth working
Yeah.
towards.
And that's tricky. You have to know yourself, like we talked about, you have to know yourself well enough,
Yeah,
and you have
that's a
to
big
know the
one.
people you're leading,
Yep.
to a certain degree. You have to have an understanding of them. And a lot of times, and especially with my dad, I didn't see the wisdom of things until much later.
And
Didn't
that's
because I didn't understand it because I
yep.
wasn't there. I wasn't in a leadership position. I wasn't that guy. I was just the kid trying to figure things out. Still am, just bigger.
Right. All big kids. My dad was passing. He felt like he was still a kid. I think that's just. I think that's a damn good thing because kids are moldable. You become an adult and you think you're an adult and you become rigid and stagnant, and I think
Right.
that's how you grow old. The
You
body's
need to
gonna do it
play.
one way or another. The mind and soul don't have to. It can
Oh, and
grow, but it doesn't have to
and
grow
another
old.
good leadership moment that I experienced with my father was we had to move out of the place we were in. We had to find a new place, and just the timetable was not working. And so we were like we were staying there too long, essentially. Like we were there past the lease.
Yeah.
And me and my mom were stressing about it. We're trying to figure out what to do. And then I remember talking to my dad, and he was just so lighthearted about it.
Uh,
And he just goes, "Well, the sun will shine again tomorrow."
yes.
And again, at the time, it helped a bit. It helped to have
Mhm.
that lighthearted and person there who was not stressing about it. But that mentality is very important,
Oh,
and
so
that's
important.
and I think I may have mentioned this last time. My mantra lately has just been, "There's only so much I can do,"
Yep. No,
and
we
that's
did
the
talk
and I
about
think that's
that.
a good I think that's a good thing about leadership too. Realizing that it's like, well, there's only so much you can do.
Yes.
You can only give so much guidance. You can only say, "Oh, this is what you should do. This is probably the right path. This is what I've experienced." But then you kind of got to go hands off.
Yep.
You gotta say, this is what I think, but good luck.
Yep. Well, because again, and I think I brought that up as well. You can only be so many places at once,
Yeah.
and that need to be everywhere at once can cause a ton of fucking stress. It causes that micromanaging. It causes a
Yeah.
lot of neuroses, honestly, because you're worrying about too many things that you don't have control over that you're trying to control. And that learning to let go is so fucking important, and that's what that lesson is. You know, well, tomorrow's a new day. It's you
Yeah.
can let go of it for now. You're in this moment. There's only so much you can do in that moment, so you can take that moment as it is and build something beautiful out of it, even if it's not working towards what you're so stressed about or whatever. You can breathe for a second.
Continue to exist.
That's the big one, because yeah, I mean, you have a choice, but it's not much of a choice, so might as well enjoy it.
Yep.
And no, that's the bit. Like some we haven't touched on. There's also another thing is being a leader with terrible followers. Sometimes you can be a really good leader in terms of conceptuals. You're doing everything correctly and respectfully and all of that, and you just have some folks who just will not, right? Um,
Yeah.
a- a-
I've definitely experienced that.
and that's the thing as well, and maybe it's not a fault on how you're approaching it. Maybe it could be. Maybe there's a better way to approach it. As always, there's always the what ifs, but at the end of the day, all you can do is your best. Again, go back to that Picard. You just choose a path.
Yeah.
And if Beverly is like, no, fuck that, I don't want to take that, and she just sits down, I mean, there's not much he could have done.
Right. Well, I guess at that point, just keep walking.
Yep, exactly. That's do by example. Again, that's the best you can do. Um, and so I don't have so much of that in my own life, luckily, where I've been called upon to lead, and the those who could benefit from that did not. But I could see that being terribly frustrating.
Yeah.
And I think I've been in positions, particularly when I was younger, where I was the did not, and may not have even realized I was the did not. Right? I
Sure.
wasn't keyed on to what they were doing for their form of communication. Usually because too wrapped up in self. Right? I'm not observing. I'm existing. Um,
Yeah.
and I just think that's just another angle of leadership that makes it difficult. Sometimes you can be doing everything right, and it's just not possible.
Yeah. Herding cats.
Oh, what is it? We can go back to Star Trek, Kobayashi Maru, right? Just make a choice. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best. It's like the no-win scenario, and of course Kirk's supposed to be the exception. Yeah, it's fun, but the idea, the concept behind it is sometimes you are in a no-win scenario. Those do exist. Unless
Yeah.
you're Captain Kirk, and he's like, no, I don't believe in that, and that
Right.
that's a good sign of a leader. You would want a leader that doesn't want to accept that failure.
True. That's a
Um,
fact. Yeah. I would serve on Captain Kirk's ship anytime. No
that's the
questions
bit.
asked.
That's the thing, right? Find a way out. He cheated, quote unquote, but he found a way
Yeah.
out. Um,
Hey,
and
there
that
was a win. What do
that's
you know?
right. And so that's the
Creative. What
thing.
does he say? Well, I got an award for creative thinking, or a
That was
commendation.
yeah,
Got a
that was
commendation for creative thinking.
that was it. And but the basic behind the lesson is important too, because sometimes that no win, the win is actually the smaller bit. Say it was surrender or die, right? Well, surrendering, which is usually what our military is taught to do. You just don't talk and all that because you're supposed to survive at any cost, right? And any cost could
Right. That
mean
makes
losing
sense.
the battle, right? But you survive so that you can continue to prolong the war effort, quote unquote, right? No matter what you're
Right.
doing, small sabotage or just wasting the resources on interrogating that kind of thing. None of it's fun, but nonetheless, that's how you win. You change your perspective on how you're winning. Kirk made it so that he did quote unquote win on the parameters of the test, but sometimes again you accept that surrender rather than getting blown up. You live to fight another day. That's
Right.
an important way to
Exactly.
do it, and that's a important and very difficult choice for a leader, I would assume, especially in fact, I think there's more examples in Star Trek where there are leaders who will not, particularly Klingons, that will not accept defeat, and so they'd rather die and everyone die, and that makes for
Yeah, they
great
blow up the ship.
theatrics. Yeah, it makes for great theatrics, but it doesn't really further their cause or allow them to continue working for what they wanted. It ends it. Um, it's
Right.
not the best choice in my opinion, but it's supposed to be a cultural thing, so maybe it is.
Right. It's a whole thing.
It's a
They're a
whole thing.
warrior race.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. Um,
Well, I've got a quote here from a movie I watched last night about
oh,
leadership.
okay.
An army without a leader is like a foot without a big toe. That was Bill Murray in Stripes.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Talk about herding cats. Great leader doing the right thing as a leader and then having a bunch of dips,
Hmm.
trying to.
Yep. No, exactly. That's the best. Sometimes you can be trying as hard as you can. Not, it's not going to happen.
Can
You
lead a
don't.
horse to water.
Yep. Can't make them drink. Um, it's. I think leadership is. I think we've. What I think makes this series kind of very consistent is that all of the giants we've chosen are very multifaceted, and they usually have that wonderful duality that's built into most things within reality. And
Yeah.
there's so many facets to leadership that we've kind of hit on. We hit on poor leaders. We've heard on good leaders, bad followers. We've hit on good leaders. We've hit on uh, uh, we've hit on a lot of variations of leadership. And at the end of the day, again, it's an important thing. I think from the individual scale, as we're talking about, up to the parental scale, to the teacher scale, to the
Hmm.
we can say village scale or maybe family scale, I guess would be the next, where you have your patriarch or matriarch. It's different levels that interact with each other because not all leaders are ranked the same as well, and sometimes you can have a great high up leader and terrible down below leaders, or vice versa, and that can make all the difference in the structure itself.
Right.
The machine that's being built. You could have a great sergeant and a terrible general. You can have a great general and a terrible sergeant. Um, and the most successful leadership tends to be probably a mix of all those, as that Frank Herbert quote. It's a mix of individuals and mob.
Yeah, it's the duty of the leader to maintain the level of individuals.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and what was it? Just too many individuals and nothing gets done, or something like that.
No, no, it wasn't. It was. It just said too few individuals and a people becomes a mob.
Hmm. Because I think there's a negativity in too many individuals as well, which would be nothing gets done. Um,
Sure, not expressed in this quote though.
yeah. So that would be my end of on that. Is I think yeah, if there's too many people running off in too many directions, then leadership is pointless. Um,
Right, you have to have. Well, I guess what the key there is you want individuals because they will speak their mind and they will have different perspectives. And just like Picard and Kirk, they take counsel.
yes.
And McCoy was always speaking his mind. He was always an individual. He would always tell Kirk when he thought he was wrong. He would just go off on him,
And always
and
tell him
that's what you want.
what he's not is, what he is and what he isn't.
Exactly, and that's an individual. That's what you
Yes.
want. But also, he would take orders. If
Yeah,
he told,
that's
"Hey,
the
Bones, I don't give a damn. Shut up. Do what I said."
yep.
He would. You know,
That's the
he'd
bit.
be mad about it, but he would do it still because he trusted the captain.
That exactly, and that's the role. That's the role indeed. God, other leadership structures that kind of reminds me of where we're talking about sci-fi space version of it, but old school British Navy leadership was insane, but the position they were
Very
put into
rigid.
was insane. Can you
Yeah, kind of a
imagine?
necessary harshness.
Yeah, like can you imagine 45 guys or whatever stuck on a boat for 3 months and all they see is fucking water?
Yeah, you
Like
have to be pretty harsh to
that's
make that work.
and that's part of the bit as well. Is there is no one type of leader to fit all roles or all
Agreed.
circumstances. It's all very 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 adaptive, and there are some kinds of leaders and some people or in personality of leaders that can adapt to many many different circumstances. You get your Kirk right, but that's not common.
Definitely not. Agreed.
Well, we are hitting an hour. Are there any more final thoughts on leadership that we can think of? Any examples of leaders you really appreciate, whether it's in media or history or what have you?
I mean, it's the for obviously Captain Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely a huge leader for me. Definitely my favorite captain kind of figurehead in that context. Um,
You mentioned King Arthur as well, and I would agree with that one.
Definitely Yeah, of course, King Arthur. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of real life leaders that I've admired, and it's such a mixed bag.
With
With
real ones, there's
fiction,
exactly with fiction,
you have the benefit.
yeah, the clearer lines of morality. Whereas
Yeah,
in we could bring up Alexander the Great or any of the Caesars or blah blah blah, and it's just like, well, yeah, but they were murderers and massacres and so many other
yeah.
things that
So at the
eh,
end of the day, I think what the most important form of leadership is the leadership of your heart
yeah,
and your conscience, and sort of following what you believe is right, and you know pursuing what's meaningful in that way, and not being led astray, chasing those dreams down, chasing what your heart desires, what you want to accomplish, and just trying to be the best version of yourself that you can be, and you know be a good leader of yourself, but also, like a good leader, be willing to take counsel and reevaluate a situation. Don't be so always give yourself a little bit of self-doubt. Inject a little self-doubt. That's helpful. Not enough to derail you, but enough to keep you on track.
keep you conscious and not driven by not going full Captain Ahab. Um,
Exactly.
And an example of a poor leader that I kind of thought of, and wasn't a leader very long, and because he's a poor leader, was Mr. Jack Sparrow. Not a great captain, um, though they
But
have
you were
heard
a
of him.
poor captain, but a captain nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly. So was he a leader? Absolutely, and they went to hell to save his ass. But nonetheless, that's an example of a very like not that inspiring, very crafty, but too individual, and not so much for a group of folks. Barbosa, he had a lot of people to take care of and quote unquote unzombify, particularly in the first one, and so better captain. Uh, but nonetheless, it
He
is
got him into that. So,
also, yes. Well, got him out of it, got him in it, got him back in it,
right.
right?
Fair enough.
It's both. And to be fair, they didn't really care for him either. He had to rule by force. But we were talking about the British Navy. There you go. But I think you got to be wary of those eager to wear the leadership cap. I know there's actually quite a few good
Yeah, I agree.
quotes about that. Those too eager to rule should not. But at the same time, you can't be afraid to be a leader if you see that if you have a vision that you know will bring, I'm going to use the term prosperity to whatever situation it is. You can't be afraid to take on that role. Um, you have to, again, if you're leading your own heart and you're leading from yourself, you're leading yourself forward, and you're doing it correctly, and if your dream requires others to follow, um, then you have to adapt. Another great example of a what I call a good leader, and it's not even much of a leader. We've talked about different types of leaders taking counsel. Luffy from One Piece is not very intelligent. He's not a smart guy. He's not dumb, but he's not smart. It's part of his bit. It is a slight comedy strung series, but his leadership comes from one understanding the bonds of found family, quote unquote, his crew. Being a symbol for that, being the heavy hitter in terms of willing to stand in front of them and protect them against whatever odds it is, being that bulwark, and being a again projecting such a clear and grandiose vision that can encompass others' visions into this greater idea and push it forward. And I think that's a big thing within my own work. That's the thing, right? I work with somebody who wants to be a professional line artist, somebody who wants to be a professional colorist. These things, right? These are dreams. These are their own paths that they wish to follow. It encompasses in mine, which is to create this grand story. Um, and being able to organize and push that forward is a wonderful blessing, and it's something I took on because it was important to me, and it's because I had a very clear vision that could indeed bring good things to those to myself, to the world, in my opinion, and to many others. And anyway, it's worth doing. It's worth trying. If it doesn't work for you, it's all right. Everybody fucks up. But leadership is a very important tool. It's one, as usual, that you have to understand and requires a lot of self reflection to utilize correctly.
I agree. I've seen a lot of situations where a leader was necessary, like in emergency moments where somebody has to take charge and figure out what needs to be done. And sometimes it's good to be able to be that person,
Yes.
just to have that awareness and that preparedness to sort of take on those challenges as they come. Or if you're not, to be the person who can back them up, to
Yes.
be the person who's useful in those situations, the person who can take an order
Yep.
and be useful and make things happen and not let ego get in the way. That's one thing I definitely will pride myself on, is when I go in a situation to help somebody, I don't mind them telling me what to do,
Yes.
because that's what I showed up for.
Yep.
I showed up here to help you. So just tell me what to do and I'll do it to the best of my ability. It's not going to bother me. Let's just get what you need done.
Yes. And
So I think
that's
that's the other side of the coin, is being able to be led
yes.
well, and making that decision, obviously, not just led by anyone.
That's a big one too. Anybody who wants to know what really shit leadership looks like, please watch "They Live" by John Carpenter. Nonetheless, and try not to see too much into this world because it'll break your heart. But nonetheless, I want to thank you folks for joining us. I'm Cody with Ironverse Comics. You can check out all our stuff later on, and I'm joined by the ever incredible.
Laguna Munta, aka Christopher Messick, and if you want to check out my music, it's on Bandcamp. And I just released this limited edition poster that I've had around since the Chuck
Oh,
campaign. It's the 11 by 17 version of the back cover art of the album. I've only
nice,
got 18 of these things, and if you buy one, they're 10. I think I have them up there for $10. If you
nice,
buy it, you get a copy of the digital album with it. So if you want to
steal.
snag one of these posters, great colors, great art by Pablo Romero, get them while I have them, because I don't plan on reprinting these.
Oh, grab a hold of them. I think I have one up on my wall actually from way back when. Um, we have a new outro video. Check it out. Any thoughts on our intro, outro, this new format we're trying? This is the second time we've tried this pre-recorded. The last one actually was our most popular video so far. I really thank everybody who checked that out, whether it was through
Yes,
the shorts
thank you.
and then subbing, or if it just came up in your algorithm and you liked the thumbnail, as I very much do. I appreciate it, and hope to catch you folks next time.
See ya. Thank you.
Later on, folks.